welcome
to
Knowledge
Nudge.
some of the stuff that's been happening over the last couple of weeks.
I enjoyed the webinar we had, looking at the proposals the government had in its consultation paper around subject access requests. And yeah, it was interesting in a couple of ways. One is we were experimenting a bit, because usually the LTD webinars, there's games, there's polls. I kind of thought, well, let's just try. I'll put up some ideas and invite people's comments, and it was a little bit of a slow burner to begin with. Fair to say, Jackie.
It really was. The first sort of 15 minutes wasn't it? So, but then people start going after a while. But I think the first 15 minutes, as you said, I'll pass it back to you, Frank, was that you were asking about, had anybody read the DCMS consultation?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people hadn't, which was interesting in itself, because I mean, people are keeping an eye out for these things. I suppose if you're working day in, day out, doing the subject access requests, all the rest of it, you don't necessarily have time to stop and think and look and see, well, what's the government up to? What's the latest guidance from the ICO? Which I suppose is part of the value of the webinars. And of course, some people are engaged and they've got the cameras on and they're chatting and they're in the chat box. Other people, because of the timing, they've probably got it on in the background while they're eating a sandwich. So you've got that mixture. But eventually people did kind of warm to the theme a little bit, particularly we moved, because I started on those general points. The government's consultation document saying that GDPR is disproportionately burdensome. And challenging that, because certainly that kind of gets my my goat a little bit. The work we do being described as disproportionately burdensome. But once we get on to the more concrete stuff, the proposals around subject access requests, so looking at the potential of cost limits, like we have with freedom of information, looking at the potential for bringing in a concept similar to vexatious requests, so introducing a threshold almost for unreasonable subject access requests. Then we get some really good engagement and discussion, so that got a bit more interesting, a bit more involved then, so it was good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the key questions as well, Frank, you asked, wasn't it, was around if people thought the consultation was going to bring good things or set things back again. And that was quite an interesting conversation, and you kind of got lots of chat in the group as well, didn't you?
So what was the consensus around that? Was it a mixture of both that people were thinking?
It was interesting, and of course we our final point was, what are the chances of any of this actually happening? Because it's always that the government has to walk a bit of a tightrope here, between clearly what they want to do is strip GDPR back and reduce what they see as bureaucracy and red tape. On the other hand, they have to make sure that it's still sufficiently aligned to GDPR, that European Union won't take away UK's adequacy finding. So we'll see what comes of it. But it was interesting, particularly around things like cost limits, and people were quite adamant that should not kick in certain areas. So, for example, social care records, there shouldn't be a limit to how much time it takes to pull together your social care records if you've been in care. Which was really interesting. A few people were adamant about that. But then do we get multiple paths for subject access requests? Do we get different types of subjects? So it gets quite complicated then.
I think that's it. I mean, I like the fact, because I guess that's the practical aspect of it, because at the end of the day, one size does not fit all. The problem is when you've got the regulation, legislation, it kind of has to feel like one size fits all. But then, of course, words like pragmatic and risk and everything else comes in, and that is a bit about translating your requirement into delivering it proportionately and so on. So yeah, no, that's interesting.
Yeah, so Liz, you're running a webinar at the end of the month for us, are you as well?
Yes, I am. Yes, and we're looking at common data protection issues in the workplace. So it's actually really interesting hearing Frank talk about that, because quite a lot of the issues that have come up are around kind of capacity, volume, and coping with subject access requests and contract documentation and things that can quite quickly become voluminous. And yeah, I think there's lots of challenges. I think just reflecting back on what Frank said, for me, the one thing that is perhaps missing from the GDPR that would have helped with all of this was just using the word commensurate a few times throughout the legislation. But that's not to suggest it couldn't be interpreted in that way anyway. It just has been the approach with other European legislation that I've worked with, which has really helped people go, you know, be a bit more realistic about what they can achieve. And so, yeah, we can really, the webinar, we're going to have a look at various things. So we will be looking at subject access requests. We'll be looking at, you know, what do you do if you get lots of subject access requests at any given time? What are the hints and tips for dealing with those? Relationships with the organisation, collecting data, you know, at what point, making sure people are clear on what is personal data and when it's going to fall within the legislation, and also tricky subjects, you know, so when would you, you know, again, comes back to quite a lot of this comes back to disclosure. And if you're dealing with investigations, for example, what can you give out? What can't you give out? That kind of thing. So, yeah, lots of feedback from our potential attendees. So that's great news.
Absolutely.
And so,
yeah.
Yeah. So lots of topics to cover. So we've yet to finalise. So obviously, if anyone watching this before our webinar, get in touch. Let us know, what do you want to see on the session.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really important because we have gone out to our customers and asked them to shape that webinar for us. So yeah, that's kind of really key. And then Heather, what's going on in your world?
Coming in April. And I see it very much as me facilitating a session where people are sharing their experiences, learning from things. So we're going to take the poll approach. So maybe have 5 or 6 questions for people to be answering and then have a discussion around the outputs of that. So again, it will be really, I mean, I've got various ideas around that, but anyone that's planning coming along, please do email LTD to let them know things that they're particularly interested in talking about. And I want us to be covering both kind of practical aspects, including, are you actually in an administrator role, or are you doing it indirectly through someone else in the organisation, or are you not just doing the kind of records management compliancy side, but lots of other administrator roles as well? But the other aspect I'm really interested in discussing is how to use that role in order, and this is where the influencing people comes from, to actually influence the development and optimization of Microsoft 365, because I think often we feel we don't get opportunities. What's the famous way? We never get invited to the table. Well, this is absolutely a table in which we can decide what the entrees, the main course and the puddings are going to be. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that, and I will be picking both Frank and Lizzie's brains in terms of making sure that yeah, it's pure dead excitement.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's a real key point there, because from us, we're looking at, so records managers, some have access to the administration functions and some just don't. And it's actually just find that connecting point, really, isn't it? We are running, which I'm really excited about, a webinar with Joanna Klein, which we're talking about the kind of disconnect between IT and the information management as well. So that would be kind of a good one. But yeah, absolutely. Really, really kind of exciting. We've run a couple of webinars around information architecture, and one of the kind of key points to come out of that was that sort of, you know, Office 365 has been rolled out very quickly over the last couple of years. Every organisation is taking a different approach, and you know, the structure of it, kind of the information architecture, just isn't there. It's not a piece that's there. And I think the way I described it, because I find sort of it's a virtual world, isn't it? And you can't like picture it and you can't see things, that an easier way to sort of think about it is that you wouldn't build a house without any plans. Then you wouldn't then lay bricks, you wouldn't lay cement. And then you can build it room by room. So then you take a room. So when I'm talking about taking a room, you take it around each different application in Microsoft 365 and tailor make that. And for me, that's a really kind of a digestible way to understand the Microsoft sort of landscape.
I think the use of analogies is absolutely so important, because as long as they're being able to visualize it, for most people, records management, information governance is a bit of a mystique, and maybe seen mainly as about like thou shalt not, rather than absolutely that fundamental thing. And I think the house analogy, as I say, is brilliant. You know, if you've got rubbish foundations and you want to have the most amazing chandelier hanging in your conservatory, well, hey, it's not going to last long. It's going to land in your head, because for all you might be very bored or not even care about the foundations, but you take care that somebody's done it right.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to a point that Frank raised on the webinar, was that actually the volume of information. So it's great to have all the sort of technical abilities, but actually it's assessing the volume of the information, Frank, wasn't it? It's about, you know, are you applying?
And the other issue you've got here, of course, is you've got information governance and records management people who understand the concepts and what the organisation has to achieve, but sometimes they're reticent to push themselves forward, or they don't get the opportunity to be in those conversations. And as you said, there's that split as well. Some have got sysadmin rights of some sort, which means they can implement this directly. Others don't. Even if you don't, you have to know the language to speak. You have to know the concepts. You have to know what's possible in the 365 environment. But that should also feed back into what the sort of structures we recommend, because you know you want to make sure your information architecture, your classification scheme, your file plan doesn't just apply good information governance principles, but actually makes the best of the technology. You know, makes sure that it uses good practice from a 365 point of view, so that we get the best out of the tech, as well as the good solid information governance and records management.
I think also that it also helps, because if you take the information architecture approach, it reminds organisations that it's not just about Microsoft 365. They do have information sitting in lots and lots of other places. So having the universal rules and then being able to apply them within M365. In fact, you could even see the analogy you had earlier on, Jackie, about the house. The different rooms could be the different systems and repositories in which the stuff is. You've got overarching rules around that, and then applying them. I sometimes use cakes. Cake recipes is another one that sometimes works well.
What's that then, Heather? What's that
so you might want a fairy cake, whereas I want fruit scones. But basically there are some archetypal rules around making both fairy cakes and fruit scones, but there's some variations, because if I gave you a fruit scone and you went, no, I want a fairy cake, you're not going to be very pleased about it.